Welcome back to the Denison Forum podcast. I'm Dr. Mark Turman, the Executive Director of Denison Forum. Today I'm here with Lee Bratcher, and let me take a moment to introduce him to you. Lee is most importantly married to Becca, and they have 3 children, Kinsey, Ivy, and Kaylee. Lee also has a significant background and resume that I want to share with you, but want to introduce our topic today. First of all, you probably, like me, were sitting watching the Super Bowl, and it's the one event where we watch the commercials as much as we watch the actual event in many ways. And you probably, like I, saw a number of these strange ads come across. One even had a QR code that just floated across the screen that was somehow connected to this thing called cryptocurrency. And Lee is joining us today to talk about that topic. Let me just give you a little bit of his background. Lee has served until recently as the chair of politics, philosophy, and economics at Dallas Baptist University, one of our fellow institutions and close friends out in the Dallas area. He is also executive director of the Institute for Global Engagement at Dallas Baptist. I'll get you to explain that in a minute. He is a captain in the United States Army Reserves and is serving as an instructor for ROTC cadets at Dallas Baptist and UT Dallas. He has a master's in international relations from St. Mary's and is in his 6th year as a PhD candidate at the University of Texas at Dallas, writing a dissertation on the implications of blockchain technology and on property rights and real estate. And former to being a part of academia and what he's doing now, he served in the military and has also been a police officer in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So thank you for both of those, Lee. He is also now the founder and president of the Texas Blockchain Counsel. So for believers today, Lee, welcome to the podcast, first of all, and thanks for joining us. And let's get a little bit of explanation here. Help everybody understand what the Institute of Global Engagement at DBU is all about.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark, for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. The Institute for Global Engagement, or we shorten it to IGE, is a think tank within the institution that focuses on being a catalyst for moral and spiritual renewal in the public square. So it was actually incubated by now president of the institution, Dr. Adam Wright, and the founder of Denison Forum Ministries, Dr. Denison, when they were on a trip in the UK and thinking through what it would look like to have a think tank that equipped believers to have conversations in the public square about the issues of our day through a Christian worldview. So that is the IGE, and we have fellows that write and put out articles. We host events and speaker engagements at DBU. Most recently, we've had people as varied as General Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense, come and speak at DBU. To just recently, we had
Judge Ken Starr.
Yeah, Judge Ken Starr. I was blanking on his name for a second.
Yeah.
That was just a few weeks ago. Judge Starr was out there talking about religious liberty.
Right.
So that's the IGE in a nutshell.
Okay. Well, something that's maybe a little bit more foreign to us is what is the Texas Blockchain Counsel? Tell us what that's all about.
The Texas Blockchain Counsel is an industry association. It was birthed several years ago as a result of my research at DBU and writing about blockchain and property rights for my academic research area. And I saw the need for someone to come in and communicate clearly with elected officials, with policymakers, and even the traditional elites within Texas and then also broadly the United States about what this technology can do for the country, for our communities. And the community, especially the crypto community and the Bitcoin community, at the time was not very interested in taking the time to do that, right? They were building, they were sometimes breaking things, building and breaking. And when I say breaking, I mean when you're innovating, sometimes you have to break things,
Right?
Because things have become calcified. And I know I'm speaking very vaguely. We can get into certainly more specifics, but in general, I saw a need for a liaison between the industry and elected officials and traditional power brokers and elites. So what I decided to do was start to engage those communities and bring them together. As an academic, I was sort of the neutral party there. That was non-threatening.
Yeah.
And I was able to reach out to both sides. And the TBC, or the Texas Blockchain Counsel, we call it the TBC, is an industry association. So it's a nonprofit. It's a 501c6. And the C6 means that we can engage in politics, hire a lobbyist. That means that we're not funded through donations. We're actually funded through membership dues from our member companies.
Okay.
And we have about 90 member companies and several hundred individuals from across the state of Texas that are dues-paying members of the organization, and grown from just me at the inception to a staff of about 6 at the moment. We have a lobbyist, communications director, chief operations officer, et cetera. So a team that's really building and working on policy and also the traditional industry association type things, bringing companies, helping them find their next potential client or employee or investor. In fact, I'm speaking at the Lions Den in 2 days at DBU. Lions Den is a investor conference, a pitch day for people in the faith community, people who are interested in impact investing, right? Where their dollars can be matched, their investment dollars can sort of match their worldview and their ethical outlook. Yeah. So I'm speaking on Bitcoin, blockchain, and crypto. There,
kind of a version of the Shark Tank, if you will.
It
in
is.
Some ways.
It is. It's exactly right.
Yeah. So okay. So kind of sounds like a piece of infrastructure that needed to be built, kind of a bridge between two parts of this world that we hope to understand more. So doing a little bit of just very, very basic kind of background, the idea of cryptocurrency. Crypto, just by simple definition, is kind of hidden. The word means hidden or not obvious, coded, if you will. And then as it relates to currency, maybe the best way to start off is that for Christians, for Christian leaders emerging, trying to understand this world, just try to paint a basic idea. I think it seems like we have new words and new things coming into our experience all the time these days. Trying to think about, when did I first hear the word cryptocurrency? Feels like somewhere in the last 3 years, perhaps. But when we typically think about currency, we think about money, right? We think about something that is issued by a government authority, in typical thinking, U.S. Treasury issues and says this is legitimate currency by which you can buy and sell and do business with. And that we understand that other countries have the authority and they create their own currency, and we get that. Again, that's where the average person kind of thinks. And so when you start talking about something like cryptocurrency, it almost is like the default mindset is okay, that's suspicious just by the name. What do we mean by a hidden or an encoded kind of money that transacts? Is that something that we just need to run away from? And then you start hearing other terms that you somehow discern are connected, but you don't understand. So tell me if I'm on the right track. Cryptocurrency is really a category, and then you have players in the field like Bitcoin and is it Doggy Coin and a whole. I looked up there at least 25 different cryptocurrencies that just popped up immediately in a simple search. So am I headed down the right path, at least in the most basic understanding?
Yeah, I would say in general the right direction. I definitely wouldn't put Bitcoin in the same category as it's DOGE coin, the Dogecoin.
Yep.
So some people think it's doggy, but it's Doge, DOGE.
Yeah, I've heard people say it in different ways.
Yeah, so there's certainly distinct differences, and I can get into some specifics. But if you don't mind, I'm going to zoom back out a little bit.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
And I'm going to start 500 years ago.
Okay.
With a Franciscan friar Franciscan monk named Luca Pacioli during the Renaissance.
Okay.
Developed double entry accounting. Double entry accounting is the ledger system of debits and credits that we've used for the past 500-600 years.
Now you're speaking the language of my daughter, who's a CPA. So okay.
Absolutely. And this is generally what this innovation is all about. It's about ledgers. It's about trust. It's about transacting value over time and space. Double entry accounting allowed merchants to transact and conduct trade over time and space without trusting their counterparty. And we have entire institutions that have been built out, the banking world, the fiduciary worlds, title, insurance, all kinds of these payment processors in the 21st century that have sprung up to create an ecosystem of trust, and they have done an amazing job at that. And the innovation that we're talking about here, which is started with Bitcoin but is broadly understood to be blockchain technology. But I'm going to talk mostly about Bitcoin at first because it was the first, and it is a good case study to understand the industry as a whole.
Okay.
We move forward in history, 450 years, I guess, or several hundred years to the Bretton Woods era, post-World War II, where fiat money is established that the U.S. dollar will be the world reserve currency. It's tied to physical gold, which, by the way, when we think of currency today, we think of state-issued money, but that's only within our lifetimes. All of the generations before us and in millennia, currency was actually often not state-issued because the state would immediately inflate the value of their currency. There's numerous examples from the Romans to the monarchs in England that they would add adulterants to the coinage to make it go further, which is basically inflation.
Right.
And so money has been something that's fungible, something that's that can be exchanged holds value, has a store of value. So there's different properties of money, and really gold has been the best example of money over the millennia. And it's only within the last, I guess since 1945 that fiat has reigned supreme. And since 1971-72, that fiat without a gold backing, when Nixon took the U.S. dollar off the gold backing, has existed as just the full faith and credit of the United States. And I'm as you mentioned in the article or in my introduction, a member of the U.S. military. Obviously, nothing I'm saying today is my opinions are solely my own and not opinions of the U.S. military. But I say that to say that I'm very patriotic, and I support the peace and prosperity that the United States has established throughout our country and even the world in many places because of our institutions.
Right.
So some people may look at crypto and Bitcoin and think they just want to bring down the institutions. In reality, I think we need to reform and change institutions. Institutions establish trust, and it's very important. But when institutions have existed for a long period of time, this Lord Acton is famously quoted as saying power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
Right.
And it's also echoed in the Proverbs.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And not only the Proverbs, but several places in Scripture.
Yeah. And our audience has certainly heard Dr. Dennison say this many times before, that, it was Friedrich Nietzsche who said that man's will to power is at the very core of what our sin problem is. And when you start attaching that, particularly to the power of something like money, then there can be all kinds of corruption, and corruption that grows over time, corruption that grows in institutions, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I should correct myself. Lord Acton was probably referencing scripture when he made that quote. So I think we need to probably amend the record and understand that he wasn't the originator of that thought, but he's most famous for it.
Yeah.
So long story short, there is a need to bring an element of democratization back to the transfer of value. When we saw what the internet did in the 90s for the transfer of information, it made the internet ubiquitous. It made information available at everyone's fingertips.
Right.
Bitcoin and blockchain technology as a whole will do the same for the transfer of value. So let me kind of restate that more succinctly. Bitcoin and blockchain will do for the transfer of value what the internet did for the dissemination of information. It is really that profound.
Yeah, which is transfer of value is simply a way of saying about one of the primary functions of money. It is a means by which we transfer value.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, and I would even expand it beyond money to ledgers, ownership, property rights over your assets, be they money, property, whatever. I guess there's other categories, right? There's securities. That's kind of a specific form of property, right? There's real property, real estate, and there's various other assets. So tracking assets without having to use very expensive intermediaries, and also without worrying about censorship. This is one of the things that I think is interesting for our audience in the Western world. As Christians, we feel very safe from persecution, although that could be changing,
right?
And it is changing,
right? Sure.
But in the developing world, it is not the case, as I'm sure you and Dr. Dennison talk about in this podcast often.
Right. Places like Cuba and what we're seeing in the Ukraine.
Venezuela, Ukraine, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what this technology can do, and then I'm going to start talking about Bitcoin, which brings us to almost the present 2008. But let me first say this. What this technology can do, it's uncensorable by tyrants or governments. Now that can be good or bad, right? It's amoral. It's a technology. It's uncensorable by the IRS, which is a little bit, we need, bearer assets like U.S. dollars are also somewhat uncensorable as well because you can exchange those without the knowledge of the IRS. That's how people launder money.
Yeah.
But with Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, it's a similar level of uncensorability, but it's more fluid. It's more digital. It is a digital transfer of value. It's a digital store of value. So think about the persecuted Christian, or even just the general public in Venezuela or in Ukraine or in Iran or Cuba, like these places we're talking about. I'll give you an example from Venezuela. The last several years have been horrific there with hyperinflation, the state confiscating the assets of people, mass migration and refugee flows to Colombia and other parts of Latin America and the United States.
Right.
So these Venezuelans have no way to get their wealth out of the country. First of all, their wealth is inflating very rapidly, and dissipating into their spending power is becoming very limited. So they want to get their wealth out of the country. They buy Bitcoin, because if they bought gold bars, they'd be heavy for one, and two, they'd be confiscated by border guards.
Yeah, they'd be taken away.
The Colombia or the Venezuelan military.
Yeah.
And they have to do this, by the way, because Venezuela's instituted capital controls. And so they're censoring people's money. They're censoring people's ability to transfer wealth based upon a myriad of factors, right? Based upon mostly just because they want that money to stay in the country, but also because maybe they're political dissenters or they don't agree with the state, or they have a faith background that the state doesn't promulgate. So these individuals can buy Bitcoin. They can either hold that on a flash drive or in a digital wallet on their phone. If they're afraid that their phone's going to get confiscated, they can put it in a, we'll call it a hot wallet online, which I can explain a little bit more about later. They can memorize the key phrase. It's a series of words that you can use as sort of your password recovery, if you will, because there's no centralized entity that you can recover your password. This is all decentralized.
Right.
And then they walk across the border. They may get everything stolen from them, but when they get to Colombia, all they need is an internet connection and that phrase that's in their mind, or they can memorize their cryptographic key, and then they can recover that wealth. they can bring it back into Bitcoin, and then sell that for U.S. dollars, euros, whatever currency they need.
So it becomes, if I'm following you right, it becomes almost like a global currency that can be put into the currency of any place that you are.
Correct.
It can be essentially exchanged. Bitcoin can be exchanged for, U.S. dollars or pesos or francs, whatever part of the world you're in. You can access it through this digital global opportunity. Because it's not being held in a central treasury security within any particular country.
Correct.
Yeah, which first makes me ask the question of what guarantees its security? Is it the simple fact that it's decentralized?
Great question. And let's dig into that. So in 2008, the white paper was published by a pseudonymous author named Satoshi Nakamoto, or authors. Could be multiple people, probably was. We still don't know who those people are or were. Many surmise that they have passed away because with Bitcoin and other digital ledgers, these ledgers are visible to everybody online. So I could go and see transactions happening in real time. And now I see them happening from wallet to wallet, and I see the amounts, but I don't see who owns that wallet. That's why it's private and kind of a freedom technology or uncensorable technology, because you can see these transactions happening, but you don't know
who the players
who
are,
the players
who
are.
the individual players are.
And so the wallet that is attributed to the pseudonymous author Satoshi Nakamoto had a lot of Bitcoin in it. And back in 2008, Bitcoin was worth zero. It was worth a few pennies in 2009, and it grew in value from there as demand increased for it. But to this day, that wallet has not moved money, or Bitcoin has not left that wallet. This person has not cashed out, or this group of people have not cashed out. There's billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin in this wallet, and those funds have not moved. So that's why I think that the original author might have passed away.
Right.
It's been 2008 was 13 years ago, 14 years ago. So it's been some time. So let's talk about how Bitcoin works. And again, this is Bitcoin was the invention. The white paper actually established this technology that eventually became what we know as blockchain technology. So Bitcoin is the birth of this. And what this is a decentralized peer-to-peer cash network, peer-to-peer network.
Okay.
And there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin. It's important to know that it's not inflationary, it's deflationary, because it's hard-coded into the system that there will only ever be 21 million of these Bitcoin. They're dividable, they're divisible up to 100 millionth of a coin. And so you can buy $10 worth of Bitcoin. You don't have to buy a whole coin, which right now is trading at like $45,000.
Yeah, for one.
One, yeah. So, you can buy $1 worth of Bitcoin, $10, $100, whatever.
In the same way that you would buy any other kind of stock or bond.
Correct.
As an investment.
Correct. You can fractionalize. You can, like with Robinhood, you can buy a share of Berkshire Hathaway stock.
Right.
So the way this technology works is it uses decentralization and cryptography to solve the double spend problem, to solve digital scarcity. Because if we think about things online, there is a challenge with things online around digital scarcity. You can't create digital scarcity, at least you couldn't before 2008. Think about Napster. Once the internet or entrepreneurs on the internet figured out how to copy music and stream it, or basically copy it and send it to everybody,
right,
the record label's business model broke.
Just fell apart. Yeah.
Like selling CDs fell apart because you can't create digital scarcity. You can't fence in. Like once something's on the internet, even think about a Word document. That's even easier to think about. If I send you a Word document, it has a picture of a $1 bill on it, and I claim that that's $1, or I claim that's a digital currency or worth something, you can just and say you believe me for some reason, you could send that dollar or that Word document to 1 million different people.
Right.
And instantly inflate it to create $1 million. So it's hard to keep things finite or scarce online. It's hard to stop the double spend problem, right? Or the triple spend problem, or the million spend problem. I give you that dollar, I also send it to 1 million other people, and instantly there's obviously no value there. There's no control over inflation or the monetary policy of that supposed currency. So with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency, you actually have the real invention is the solving of digital scarcity, solving of double spend through cryptography.
So in the case of, let's just say in the case of Bitcoin, how did they solve that problem? How did they guarantee that there wouldn't be millions and millions of more Bitcoin that would actually get inflated? How did they solve that?
Yes. So because of the decentralized aspect of Bitcoin, so there are nodes, which are just computers, running copies of the ledger. Now, let's think back to what I started talking about at the beginning, which was double entry accounting.
Right.
This is all based on ledgers. Who owns what? This is really all a ledger is.
Right.
So there are these copies of the ledger that are held by computers in the network that are unaffiliated to each other, and they all have the same copy of the ledger. And through cryptography, these ledgers are updated every 10 minutes to all have the exact same balances in ledger.
So it's like a constantly updating record of who owns what.
Exactly.
And in the case of Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, this is how we know where all of it is.
Exactly.
This is how we know at any given moment who's holding what.
And you and I could go online, or your listeners, and through some searching on a block explorer, could actually see, different wallets and how much Bitcoin they hold. Again, we can't see the owners of those wallets.
No.
Now, let me clarify. If you have bought that Bitcoin on like a U.S. exchange like Coinbase or Kraken or Gemini, they probably know who you are because you've gone through know your customer and anti-money laundering checks. You've sent them your ID, and you've done all the regulatory things that you need to do to satisfy the IRS, the SEC, and other regulatory bodies. But this asset is working without the support of a centralized entity. And so how it works is all of these nodes are running copies of the ledger. They're all the same. If a node tries to submit a false transaction, or a user, a wallet tries to submit a false transaction, like say I own 1 Bitcoin and I try to send you 2. I don't own 2, I just own 1. The ledger will immediately see, hey, Lee only has 1 Bitcoin in his wallet. He's trying to send 2. That transaction is void.
It's void. Okay.
Yeah. Or if I try to send you 1 and Dr. Dennison 1 instant in the same time, and I only have 1 in my wallet, the one that the miners, which I'll talk about what mining is in a second, order in the transaction first will be the one where that takes place, and the other one will be voided. So there's no way to duplicate or increase the supply of Bitcoin.
Trying to, again, think of how this might work for somebody who's not as conversant as you are. If I have money, U.S. money in the bank, then the entity that's guaranteeing that is the federal government, and not even guaranteeing it anymore, as you said, based on a gold standard. How much gold does the U.S. Hold in possession, right? It's simply based on the good faith of the federal government, right?
Correct.
But that's what I'm staking the credibility of that money that I hold is in that repository. What I hear you saying is that now it is this global ledger that is constantly updating and guaranteeing that, okay, well, there's not false multiplication of Bitcoin or other currencies. So that's how you keep it from inflating in a false way. And the most important thing here is we need to make sure nobody breaks the internet, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where this is where this ownership ledger is being protected and held.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And it uses cryptography to secure the network. So the miners, which are really just fancy servers, are using a hash algorithm called SHA-256, and they are trying to guess. They're using energy and trying to prove that they have solved a very, very complex cryptographic equation by throwing millions and millions of numbers into the equation, trying to solve it. And the miner that solves that equation gets the right to create the next block of transactions. So every 10 minutes, the ledger updates.
Okay.
Which is much better than every 3 days or however ACH or Swift or the current Rails work, right? It seems like it clears instantly, but all that stuff on the back end takes days.
Right.
And you can claw back an ACH transaction 90 days after it happens. I don't know if...
No, nobody knows that, probably, or a bunch of us don't know that. A bunch of us are just now catching up to this idea of what the SWIFT system is as a sanction against Russia right now, right? Trying to understand, well, what does all that mean? That, okay, well, we're just going to make sure that Russia can't do business by taking them out of the SWIFT system, right?
Right.
And
so it uses cryptography to, these miners are working to solve this very complex cryptographic equation, the one that solves it first, and it solves approximately every 10 minutes. So there's a new block solved every 10 minutes. They update, they add the next block to the chain. They hash all the previous blocks to the chain so that the chain is immutable before it, so you can't go back and change records in the ledger.
Right.
And all the other miners, while this cryptographic equation is very difficult to solve, once you have the answer, it's really easy to back check because you just plug it in and you're like, that miner solved it. Yeah. He gets to, or, that computer gets to form the next block, and they all come to consensus. That's the term for it. They come to consensus on what the ledger is, and all the nodes therefore are then have an updated copy of the ledger of the Bitcoin blockchain.
So it's essentially like each of the nodes is holding the other nodes accountable.
Exactly. And it would require more than 50% of the nodes and or miners, which are not full nodes, but they're the servers,
right,
to be malicious to break the network. So think about, that's called a 51% attack. If 51% of the nodes and the miners colluded together and said, we're going to change the ledger. We're going to make 1 + 1 = 5 and break the ledger, basically give somebody an advantage or give them a million Bitcoin or something. Well, two reasons why that won't happen. One, it would be the economic incentive for all of these miners and the nodes is to keep the integrity of the system of the Bitcoin blockchain, because if they collude to break it, then all of the Bitcoin that they hold will instantly become worthless, because this whole system is built on cryptographic certainty and digital scarcity. And so it would break the whole system, and Bitcoin would plummet to a value of 0.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about cryptography as kind of the basis of the language of this, right?
Uh-huh.
You're really talking about encoding, right? Or what the average person would talk about, basically computers speaking in code to each other, right?
Correct.
And tell me if I'm wrong. Am I hearing in that, obviously there's massive complex algorithms that are driving all of this. Is there an element of artificial intelligence that is driving these miners and nodes as they communicate and maintain? Sound like the core of this is the ledger, right? Mm-hmm. That's the fundamental aspect and foundation of where Bitcoin cryptocurrency gets its value, is from this agreed upon ledger,
right?
And is it simply that these computers and these massive nodes have been programmed in a certain way, or is there a need that artificial intelligence is in some way at play here, or is it simply just advanced computer technology, advanced computer encoding?
Thankfully, artificial intelligence plays no role, because that would cause uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
This is a very certain cryptographic algorithm that's been existed for many years and has been used by the U.S. government, the military, Department of Defense. So this element of cryptography is not new. There's no changing the way the consensus mechanism works, and there's certainly no artificial intelligence. So the miners are just machines that run, they have application-specific integrated circuit chips in them, so ASIC chips, and they just run the equation. And people, like I for example, have several miners myself that I use to earn Bitcoin by plugging them, because you actually can earn Bitcoin as a result of using miners to mine Bitcoin. And there's really no artificial intelligence element to it whatsoever, which is I think good. Creates a little bit of simplicity in even though this cryptographic equation is not necessarily simplistic, it is elegant though.
Right.
It is elegant cryptography, and there's $1 trillion worth of value, like trillion US dollars worth of value in the Bitcoin network. So what I mean by that is Bitcoin has a market cap of just under $1 trillion. Sometimes it's over $1 trillion, depending on what the value of Bitcoin is per coin. So that's a pretty significant amount that is secured by this network, this global network that hackers are trying constantly to hack, but they cannot. And I will stake my reputation and I would probably bet all the money that I have in the bank that hackers will never be able to hack the Bitcoin blockchain. Now, hackers can hack centralized exchanges, like honeypots of data at some exchange. I won't throw any names out, but these exchanges that operate as centralized entities that help people buy and sell. Now, those could and can be hacked, and you've heard maybe of a few of those that have been hacked. That's certainly, but that's not really using this technology. That's an exchange that's using the traditional on and off ramps, and that's no different than like the Citibank hack or the Experian hack or these other hacks that we've heard of, the Yahoo hack, right?
Yeah.
These are all the same. The Bitcoin blockchain has never been hacked. A proof of work block, once this gets big enough, not even the U.S. government or the Chinese government could hack this. Because what would need to happen is the U.S. government would have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars or trillions of dollars to try to buy up all this hash power and all these nodes and try to, but it's just not, it's not feasible. Even if the government decided they wanted to do that, there would be no market for it. There would be no mechanism for. I mean, it's so decentralized now, and it's operating so efficiently that the government wouldn't want to do that. And I actually make. I regularly speak with elected officials, including Governor Abbott, Senator Cruz, Senator Cornyn. For those listeners outside of the state of Texas, may not be as familiar with those elected officials, but those are kind of the highest ranking officials in the state of Texas. I regularly converse with them about this technology, and they understand that this technology, blockchain as a whole and Bitcoin in specific, and crypto, is very important for the U.S. competitive edge and innovation. If we want the U.S. dollar to remain the world's reserve currency, which I do, and I think you probably do as well, and most Americans do, because that's the reason why we can borrow so much is because our dollar is, we can borrow in the dollar, which is the reserve currency of the world. Yeah. If we want the dollar to remain the world's reserve currency, we have to remain innovative and competitive. And Bitcoin is not a competitor to the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. It's a supplement to it. Think about it as digital gold. The more dollar or the more Bitcoin that the US government can hold,
it's like they're acquiring more gold.
An asset, exactly.
And instead of putting gold bricks in Fort Knox or somewhere else,
you're putting Bitcoin in a digital wallet in somewhere in the Treasury in department.
Yeah.
And then other central banks around the world see, the U.S. financial position continues to increase, and it continues to get better because more gold, more Bitcoin.
More Bitcoin.
Yeah. And Bitcoin's not the whole answer, right? It's only $1 trillion market cap. Gold is a $10 trillion market cap.
Yeah.
So gold is 10 times the size of Bitcoin. But we'll come back and do this podcast in a few years. And my estimation is that by 2028, Bitcoin and gold will have an equal market cap.
Oh, wow. Okay. It will grow that fast.
It will grow that. Well, it's actually grown much. That's kind of a conservative estimate because it's over the last several years, it's grown much, much faster than that on a percentage annualized basis, like 100 and something. I don't want to quote the percentage because I'm going to misquote it, but someone can Google and figure out the annualized increase in Bitcoin over time. Now, let me talk a little bit about adoption.
Okay.
Texas, 29% of Texas voters, or likely Texas voters, so between the ages of 18 and older, own Bitcoin or crypto. And that probably is surprising to many of your listeners.
Oh, yeah.
29%.
Yeah.
And that is a survey done by a group that we actually commissioned the survey at the TBC, a group called On Message. They do a lot of political polling, and that's a 2.2 margin of error with a statewide survey. So it's a pretty significant number.
So do you think most of those, nearly 30% of registered voters, do you think they've simply learned about this in various ways? Were they perhaps advised this way by somebody like a financial investor who presented this to them as, hey, this is like a high quality blue chip stock that you might want to consider, like in years gone by, hey, if you can buy IBM, or you can buy Apple stock, or you can buy Walmart stock, this is something like that. It's not a traditional stock, but it is something, I've heard of a number of people, friends, that have invested small amounts just because they're kind of learning what this is as something that is investable.
Right.
And is that what we're seeing? That's where this 30% of adoption has already risen from, those kinds of things?
It has. And let's think through what at the top of the hour, top of the show, you talked about the number of different crypto projects and protocols.
Yep.
There are actually thousands. Most of them are worthless. Most of them are just someone created, they replicated a blockchain, copied some code, and they have a project, and they're using it as basically tokenized equity in their startup. And they're not really that decentralized, right?
So it'd be a comparison might be of, hey,
like a penny stock.
Apple Computer got going, and some people noticed that they tried to mimic some of what Apple Computer was doing and get people to invest in their small computer company because Apple was doing so good, and they wanted to be like Apple or become the next Apple.
Correct.
That kind of thing.
Correct. And yeah, you can look at the market caps and understand, right? The free market is a beautiful thing. So people are investing in the projects that they see have the most value to humanity and that the most capital formation, the most potential to make profit, right? So there's a ton of projects out there. Again, most of them are worthless. But if you happen to pick, there's a little speculative aspect of this, which I don't condone speculation, but some people try to invest in some of these really early ones, and maybe there are a few pennies. It's a penny stock. Right?
Yeah.
It could go to 0 or it could go 100x.
Yeah.
That's not my style. I don't know enough about the market, even though this is my full-time job now. I run this industry association, and I think about these things. I only invest in the top market caps, right? The vast majority. So the blue chip stock really is Bitcoin. The blue chip crypto is Bitcoin. And I put it in a totally different class than all the others. It's really more a digital gold. It's an asset. It's the most decentralized and the most secure.
Right.
Now, the next best is Ethereum. Ethereum it's a little less decentralized and a little less secure, but it's still very, very decentralized and secure with several $100 billion market cap. So millions of people around the world own this asset. And one advantage that it does have is it has a lot of developers building decentralized applications on its protocol. So Ethereum is also a very strong one. You have several others, Algorand, Solana, HBAR. There's a variety of other coins and tokens that are in the top, say, 50 that actually have value and are producing things of value. But really, in the grand scheme of things, Bitcoin and Ethereum are, by the way, the only two that the SEC have declared to not be securities, right? So some of these other tokens actually had to go through regulated securities token offerings with the SEC to even offer them on an exchange.
Okay.
Bitcoin and Ethereum have been declared by the SEC to not be securities. So they are not stocks. They are a new category. I'm going to call them a quasi commodity currency security. Or stock.
They're trying to figure out what they're going to call it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that the regulators don't even know. The CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, all of these entities, the IRS, the Treasury, et cetera, are competing for who's going to regulate these things. And Bitcoin and Ethereum are so decentralized. And the reason why they're not securities is there's not somebody in the middle that takes a profit when these projects do well.
Right.
It's the whole community. Whereas some of these other projects, say, not any of the ones I've mentioned, say the other 1,000 that are down the list that are very early and they're not very decentralized. There's a founder who probably holds most of those tokens that if that goes up in value, they reap an outsized reward.
He's the one that reaps the reward.
Right.
Like a founder of a company.
Correct. Right. Which then, that sounds more like a security.
Yeah.
That meets the Howey test, which is how the SEC determines if something is a security or not a security. Yeah. So the expectation of the profit based upon the efforts of another is one of those rungs of that test. So that coin hasn't necessarily been declared by the SEC to be a security or not, but it probably is.
No.
Now, there's some towards the top that are so decentralized that maybe they're not. The SEC just hasn't made a determination on that yet.
Right. So it sounds like the SEC, every government, not just our government, governments around the world, are all trying to figure out how to relate to these currencies, right? And how do they understand them? How do they relate to them? But it is becoming, in a very significant way the world does business, the way the world does transaction, right? It seems to be operating in that way.
Right. Yeah, and even banks, big banks, right? JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, all the banks that we know and use are using this technology, right? They may not be holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet, although many of them are. Or like Fidelity, which offers cryptocurrency investment options to their high net worth clients.
Right.
So the banks, so they're adopting the technology. They're lending on projects that are involved in the technology, but they're also using the back end blockchain technology that was invented by Bitcoin to clear transactions because it's more efficient than the way that we did it in the analog world.
Right.
The way that we clear transactions today is the same way we've done it for many decades, and it doesn't really work in the digital world.
Because it's essentially too slow for the way the digital world operates.
Correct, and it's not the system's fault, if you will. It was developed in a time when the internet didn't exist.
Right.
So when we basically bootstrapped this or strapped on an anachronistic system that worked perfectly well decades ago when the internet didn't exist to the digital world and to digital transactions, and it's not. It may seem seamless to us, but in 10 years, just like the fax machine seemed seamless to people in the 80s, like that, and it actually provided a lot of value in that time, right?
Seemed like the most amazing thing anybody had ever seen at that moment.
Now we look back on that and think, well, that was great then, but we have way more efficient. I send an email,
right,
and it's much more efficient. Yeah. We're going to look back and say, well, the ACH or the analog way of clearing transactions or making transactions was very, it provided a lot of value for many decades, but it's not the most efficient way to do this. And so whether that is, Bitcoin or crypto or just the underlying digital ledger, the blockchain technology that banks are using to clear transactions, that's why many banks are thinking about central bank digital currencies, central banks. So the Fed, for example, is researching a central bank digital currency. President Biden has issued guidance about developing a central bank digital currency. China has been using a central bank digital currency for years now. And when the Olympians went to the Olympics, this is probably a podcast for another day, but the Chinese gave all the athletes from all these different countries their central bank digital currency, their digital yuan, to use and try and play with, and for free, basically, to try to disseminate that currency globally.
Wow!
Because they're trying to compete with the dollar.
Yeah.
The problem with the Chinese central bank digital currency or the digital yuan is that it's controlled by the Communist Party, right? It's controlled by the central government, and they have full financial surveillance into the financial lives of all of their citizens.
So in comparison, in that system, whereas in Bitcoin, that type of thing, you can see the transactions, but you can't see who owns the wallet. In the Chinese case, they can see not only the transactions, but who actually owns each of these wallets.
Correct.
And they can track it by individual or by organization if they want to.
Exactly. And the public can't see it because this is a private blockchain. There's a difference between a private and a public blockchain. Bitcoin's a public blockchain, permissionless, and the Chinese CBDC, that's what central bank digital currency, CBDC for short, is private. And so imagine, they have the social credit score in China. So imagine if you have a low social credit score and you start spending money on things that the Chinese government doesn't want you to spend money on, then they freeze your account.
Wow.
Now, in the current system, you can kind of freeze an account now. You just you tell a bank to freeze an account.
Right.
In this system, they could freeze an account instantaneously. They could charge a negative interest rate on that account instantaneously. Say you were just a wealthy Chinese businessman or woman, and you were saving your money, but the Chinese government wanted to stimulate the economy. They could say, okay, everybody whose account size is over $1 million of Chinese digital yuan, if you don't spend at least 5% of that every month, we will start assessing a negative interest rate on your bank account, and it'll automatically be
just pull it out that way.
Yeah.
So kind of the exact opposite of what you see with like Bitcoin, where it's totally decentralized and there's nobody that can freeze it, interfere with it in that way. When it's private, in the case of the Communist Party of China, that they have it's another way of control as opposed to a free market type experience.
Yeah, and that's why and let's bring this back. I know we probably don't have much time left on the podcast. Let's bring this back to Christians and the worldview that we hold.
Yes, my point exactly.
Freedom financial freedom is integral to religious freedom. Because how do totalitarian governments and autocracies try to punish or to limit the spread of the gospel? All sorts of ways, right? Physical violence, but also financial oppression and financial
constraints.
So to have an asset that is not controlled by a government is massively important for our brothers and sisters in Christ all around the world. It's a little less crucial for us in the United States. It is still important for us in the United States, but we don't depend on it, right? The dollar is still
important for
very
other reasons.
Valuable. Yeah. It's important for other reasons, exactly. Yeah. The dollar is still a huge blessing to people in the West. But people in Nigeria, Christians in Nigeria, the adoption rate of Bitcoin in Nigeria is unreal. It's 10 times what it is in the United States.
Like I say, you get into the places like that. I met somebody from Ethiopia yesterday, and you get into places like that where governments are unstable, and the ability to use their currency as a means of operating your life becomes incredibly unstable.
Yeah.
And as you said, if you're a part of a Christian group or any group that people in power want to restrict, one of the ways you can do that is by controlling their ability to operate financially, right?
Yeah. And I also want to bring up a point that to bring a biblical reference in here, and I've got to attribute this thought process to a friend of mine named Jimmy Song, who's a strong Christian. He's actually a Bitcoin core developer, like a programmer. So he builds like improvement processes. He does improvement processes to the network. He actually wrote a book called Thank God for Bitcoin. And the premise is God detests unfair weights and measures.
Right.
And
the Bible says a lot about that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Book of James particularly, and many other places, right?
Yeah. And so he talks a lot about the current system disadvantages some and is really sort of theft if you think about it. Taxation is voluntary. It's not voluntary, right? It's compulsory.
Right.
But at least we understand the value trade-off. Inflation is a form of theft. Money printing,
right,
and the government deciding who should get what, if we think about it, devalues the wealth that we've accumulated. Now, not to say that as Christians we shouldn't be giving as much of that away as we can. We're not trying to hoard it, but we also don't want a centralized government, or the federal government, inflating that away and picking winners and losers of whoever's closest to the printing press gets the most benefit from that.
Right.
So Jimmy Song has this book about the innovation that is Bitcoin. Now, we all know, and Jimmy would be the first to tell you, that the gospel is the most important thing for human flourishing in the world. Bitcoin is not even on
that scale.
Nothing is on that scale.
Yeah.
But what I will say, though, is Bitcoin is just one tool of many for increasing human flourishing. All right. What do they say? What does the scripture say? Work for the shalom of the city, the human flourishing of the city.
Right.
Nehemiah, I think, is that reference.
Right.
Where he is...
Jeremiah as well.
It's Jeremiah.
Yeah.
It's Jeremiah.
Work for the good of the city.
The good of the city. And even if you don't, even if it's not your people, because Jeremiah was not in Jerusalem at the time. He was working for the good of a foreign city, a city that he was a captive in.
Yeah.
So as we work to build human flourishing, Bitcoin is a tool for that.
Yeah.
It is a tool that through math and cryptography and some clever code has created some pretty straightforward mechanisms that's not inflatable, that you can't put your finger on the scale of, you can't
make it and become more fair for everybody.
Exactly.
Right. So we'll make sure we include that in the show notes, the reference to that book, if people want to check that out as well. And but that's a good place for us to land. Just a fascinating conversation about how things are changing in the financial world and how people can be a part of that, how they don't need to be afraid of it. Something for us to learn about, something for us to grow in. And like I said, just when you start thinking about the opportunities and implications of that, particularly for people around the world, people in oppressive situations, the opportunity to still be able to function, to be able to carry on their lives, to thrive, especially in places where they're trying to communicate the gospel, where the gospel is not welcome. So, Lee, thank you for your time. We definitely want to have you back to continue to explore this project and to understand how this part of the world's unfolding. Thank you for being a part with us today.
It was a pleasure. Yeah, hope to be able to connect with you again. And if your listeners want to learn more about this technology, we have a YouTube channel that can help educate them. It's texasblockchaincounsel.org. And same for the YouTube channel. They can just go and watch some free videos and
absolutely
understand this a little bit more.
Yeah, a lot for us to grow in so that we can be up to speed for sure. Thanks a lot for being here. Thank you for listening to the Denison Forum podcast. If this is helpful to you, please share it with others and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you.